Story 1. Am I the butthole for telling my husband that he absolutely ruined the birth of our child? Hi, everyone. Our daughter is now 8 weeks old, so obviously this whole argument has gone on for a very, very long time. We both have been holding grudges, and neither of us think that we are wrong. My husband does not know I am posting this, so I am going to keep it as anonymous as possible. So when I got pregnant with my daughter, my husband started immediately telling me that I should have a home birth. I really do not know why he was so adamant on it, but he was. At first, I brushed him off and told him I would think about it because I was only 6 weeks pregnant and the birth seemed so far off. Of course, it came quickly, and my husband would literally speak over me at doctor's appointments when my doctor would ask if I had a birth plan. This caused a few arguments between us in those 39 weeks of pregnancy, but I never really changed my mind. Eventually, my husband's mother sat down and talked to me, and she told me all of the reasons why they did not want me to go to a hospital for the birth. I expressed my concerns about the safety of the baby and myself, but just like my husband, she brushed me off. I ended up telling my husband that I would take myself to the hospital when it was time, and that I did not want a home birth. He acted as if he didn't hear me. We met with a doula who was also very pushy. I felt overwhelmed and not supported at all. I was 36 weeks at that point. So, when I went into labor, I was 39 weeks, and I absolutely begged my husband to take me to the hospital where my doctor is. He wouldn't. He spoke to me condescendingly and called the doula instead. I was in labor for about 3 days, active labor for around the last 22 hours. I cried the whole time. I just felt something was wrong. I was scared, and oftentimes they left me alone. The doula told me that if active pushing and labor reached 24 hours, I had to go into the hospital. I remember thinking that I could not decide which was worse, staying in labor for another 2 hours or having my baby right there. When she was finally out, I don't even remember wanting to hold her. I just remember crying out of relief. Obviously, I am okay now, but I did not have a good experience. On my first appointment after birth with my doctor, she was very shocked I had the baby. She was concerned. I was so upset. I told my husband that he absolutely ruined it for me. I truly never want to go through that again. I hear mothers say that they forget all the pain the second they have the baby, but I didn't. I love my daughter so much, but it was horrible, and it was entirely his fault. So I told him that several times. He rolls his eyes every time and tells me how mothers are strong and how I am not trying to be strong. I told him that if we ever have another baby, which he wants, that I will never do a home birth ever again. His response is, "We'll see." I cannot possibly be TA here, can I? Everyone around me is acting like this is so normal, but it's not. Is it? Story 2. Am I the butthole for refusing to let my sister's family live in my house after they sold theirs for a dream vacation? So, I own a modest 3-bedroom house that I've been paying off for the last 10 years. It's nothing fancy, but it's mine and I'm proud of it. My sister and her husband are the typical free-spirited types. They've always talked about quitting the rat race, living life to the fullest, all that. Well, a few months ago, they finally did it. They sold their house during a booming market, thinking the profit would fund a year-long break to travel. They believed they could stretch the money by traveling cheaply, staying in hostels or Airbnbs, and getting by with occasional odd jobs. At first, they stayed in nicer places and ate out a lot, thinking they had plenty of cushion, but within 2 months, they were out of money. They underestimated how quickly expenses would pile up, especially with 2 young kids to feed and care for. Now that their funds are drained, they've decided to stop full-time travel but don't want to settle down yet. Instead, they asked to live with me, rent-free, for the next 10 months while they figure things out. They say they'll still try to take some occasional trips if they find super cheap deals, but for the most part, they want to stay at my house. I told them no. My house isn't big enough, I don't want the disruption, and I certainly don't think it's fair for them to live off me because their plan failed. I offered to help them find an affordable rental or even cover part of their expenses for a couple of months so they could get back on their feet. But that wasn't enough. My sister blew up at me, calling me selfish and accusing me of being jealous of their adventurous lifestyle. To make it worse, my parents are siding with her, saying that family should help the family and that I'm being too rigid. The thing is, my parents live in a small apartment and can't take in my sister's family, which is probably why they're pushing it on me. They say I don't understand the value of experiences and that I should be more supportive. Some of our mutual friends are also saying I should be more understanding, but I think it's completely unreasonable to expect me to house their whole family for nearly a year just because they didn't plan properly. Story 3. Am I the butthole for leaving my husband at the hospital after he refused to be in the delivery room with me? This happened 2 months ago, but it's still causing major friction in my family, so I need some outside opinions. Me and my husband Jake have been together for 6 years, married for 3. We were both ecstatic when we found out we were expecting our first child. Pregnancy was tough for me, though. I had severe morning sickness, gestational diabetes, and was generally miserable. But Jake was supportive and sweet the whole way through, which made it bearable. As we got closer to my due date, we discussed birth plans. I was adamant that I wanted Jake in the delivery room. I needed his support, and he'd always agreed. However, a few weeks before my due date, Jake started acting strange. He was distant, distracted, and wouldn't engage in any baby-related discussions. I thought he was just anxious about becoming a dad, so I didn't press him too much. The day I went into labor, Jake drove me to the hospital but seemed off. He was quiet and kept checking his phone. When we got there, he pulled the nurse aside and spoke to her privately. She came back and told me Jake wouldn't be in the delivery room because he was uncomfortable with blood and medical procedures. I was stunned. He'd never mentioned this before. I begged him to stay, told him I needed him, but he just kept saying, "I can't do this." I was heartbroken and furious, but I didn't have much time to dwell on it as my contractions were getting stronger. Jake said he'd be in the waiting room and kissed me on the forehead before leaving. I was left alone, crying and feeling utterly abandoned. Labor was long, painful, and traumatic. I was alone the entire time except for the medical staff. When our son was finally born, I was exhausted, emotionally and physically. The nurse handed me my son, and all I felt was a deep sadness that Jake wasn't there to share this moment. After I was taken to a recovery room, I asked the nurse to get Jake. She came back and said he'd left the hospital hours ago. I couldn't believe it. I called him repeatedly, but he didn't answer. Finally, I sent him a text saying I was done and he could find his own way home. I didn't see him until the next day. He showed up at the hospital with flowers and an apology, saying he'd panicked and needed some air. He claimed he'd gone home to shower and change and fell asleep, which I didn't buy for a second. I told him I didn't believe him. I was overwhelmed with anger and hurt, and I told him he had let me down in the worst possible way. He kept apologizing, saying he knew he'd messed up and he'd do anything to make it right. I didn't want him near me or our son at that moment, so I asked him to leave. He tried to protest, but I told him I needed time to process everything. He left, and I spent the rest of my hospital stay alone with my baby, trying to grapple with the enormity of what had happened. Since then, Jake has been trying to make amends. He's been taking parenting classes, attending therapy, and is constantly trying to be present and supportive. But I can't shake the feeling of betrayal. He abandoned me at one of the most vulnerable moments of my life. Every time I look at him, I remember being alone in that delivery room, terrified and in pain, wondering why the person who promised to be by my side wasn't there. My family is split. Some think I'm being too hard on Jake, that he made a mistake and is clearly remorseful. They say he's a good father and partner otherwise, and I should focus on moving forward for the sake of our child. Others think what he did was unforgivable and I should leave him. They believe I'll never truly trust him again, and that's no foundation for a marriage. I'm torn. I do still love him, and I know he loves me and our son. But part of me wonders if I'll ever get over this. Was it just a moment of weakness on his part, or a sign of something deeper that I can't overlook? So, am I the butthole for leaving him at the hospital and now considering leaving him for good? Story 4. Am I the butthole for ending my relationship after my girlfriend said no to marriage? I have been dating my ex-girlfriend for nearly 6 years. Our relationship was a good one. After 4 years, I informed her family and friends that I was going to propose to her while we were on a family vacation and received their blessing and well wishes. The night I proposed, I tried to make the night as memorable and perfect as possible. I asked her after a nice dinner surrounded by the family, and she said, "No, not yet anyways." I was quite hurt, honestly, and went back to our room to think things out and not overreact. A few hours later, she came to the room and asked me what was wrong and why I left the group. We had a fairly long conversation as to my feelings and her reason to deny my proposal. Turns out she didn't think I was ready for the commitment just yet. So I took her thoughts to heart and informed her I understand her reasoning. However, I was raised in a way where you take a no for a no, not a maybe next time. She asked me to just wait a bit longer until we were in a stable place, and I agreed. 8 to 10 months later, she started dropping hints that she was ready to be married. I can't wait for our wedding. Our wedding is going to be spectacular. I am so looking forward to my dad walking me down the aisle. A little over a year since my first proposal, I decided to propose again, this time just us together after a wonderful date night. When I opened the ring box, she got really quiet and once again said, "No, not yet. Maybe a little more down the line." After this second refusal, I fell out of love with her. It sounds cold, but it was the truth. When we got back home, I slept in our guest bedroom and spent the rest of the night thinking of our relationship. The next morning, she asked why I didn't sleep with her in our bedroom, and I told her the truth, and informed her that I think we need to end the relationship. I informed her that I take marriage very seriously, and I do not want to be led on, and this time, this no was the final no on the subject. I gave her a month to find a new place to live, and since then, I have been receiving texts and emails from her friends and family informing me I am a heartless bastard and trying to get me to give her more time and not be a callous asshole. My friends have my back on this and understand why I ended the relationship. Story 5 am I the butthole for not inviting my father because he disowned me after knowing that I wasn't his biological child? So let's get into it, I guess. Almost a decade ago, my dad found out that my mom cheated on him with another guy years ago through my mother's sister. Back then, my mom and aunt weren't on good terms, so she told Dad everything. My parents fought over this, and Dad filed for divorce. We all got DNA tested, and out of 3 children, I was the only one who wasn't his. It felt so bad to know that your dad who raised you for almost 16 years wasn't really your dad. That didn't feel as bad as him kicking me out of his house when I was begging him not to. I wished I could just kill myself when he disowned me. My mom went into a depressive state and would just spend all day in bed and would just get out to use the toilet. My grandparents lived in a different state, but they did everything they could to make our lives better. I needed to come home from school, do all the chores in the house, and tend to my mom and check on her. I did everything that could possibly be done to make sure we lived. I would ask my mom who my real dad was, but all I got was screaming or a hit. My siblings and grandparents from Dad's side tried to make things right between me and Dad, but he wouldn't budge. Apparently, I was just a reminder that Mom cheated on him and nothing else. I remember my 17th birthday when no one remembered that it was my birthday. I cried to the point where I didn't have any tears left. Even when I graduated from high school, only my grandmother came. Why didn't my feelings matter to anyone? Why was I supposed to endure this? After I returned from my graduation, I told Mom that I was leaving if she didn't tell me who my real dad is, and this time, she did tell me who he was. I met him after finding where he lived. I discovered that I have a half-brother and that my real father was a widower and a doctor. He didn't know that I existed or the fact that Mom was married. It took us time, but we built a bond, and he helped to get through college, and he walked me down the aisle. He even got Mom some help, and I am forever grateful to him. Well, at present I was married to my lovely fiancé last week, and I didn't invite my ex-dad to my wedding. He tried to contact me before the wedding, but I don't want anything to do with him. My siblings and grandparents from my ex-dad's side say I am wrong and that he wanted to come and make things right, but I don't want to make things right. He had the right to abandon me, so I have a right to do the same. He isn't my father. He was once upon a time, but not now. I understand that he was hurt, but I was hurt too. Everyone tells me to let go of the grudge, but I just don't want him in my life, and no, I won't give him another chance. My husband understands, but no one else seems to understand what I had to go through to get to where I am now. He cannot just come to my life 9.5 fucking years later and expect things to be all right. Story 6. Am I the butthole for blocking my childhood best friend after she tried to make me pay for the catering at her son's first birthday? So here's the thing. Me and Anna have been best friends since forever. Like, we grew up together, went through school, first breakups, everything. Naturally, when she had her baby, I was thrilled for her. I even helped plan the baby shower and got super involved in her life as a new mom. But recently, things have gotten weird. Anna's son turned 1 last weekend, and she wanted to throw a huge party. I'm talking over the top. Rented venue, professional catering, decorations, the whole shebang. Now I thought we were just going to have a nice little family and friends thing, but nope. Anna had a vision. Fine, no biggie. I figured she could do whatever made her happy for her son's big day. Fast forward to a week before the party. Anna starts hinting that she's a little stressed about costs and how tight things are right now. I get it, having a baby is expensive, but she kept bringing it up in every conversation. I offered to help with decorations or pick up some snacks, but she waved it off, saying she had everything under control. The day of the party comes and it's chaos, balloons everywhere, a bouncy house, tons of people I didn't even know. I show up early to help set up, and Anna's running around like a headless chicken. Then, as we're putting out the decorations, she casually says, "Oh, by the way, I put the catering on your card." I hadn't even seen a catering bill, let alone agreed to pay for one. What do you mean you put it on my card?" I asked, trying to stay calm. She looked at me like I was being dramatic and went, "Yeah, you know I've been struggling. I figured you wouldn't mind covering it, and I'll pay you back later." Excuse me? First of all, I never once said she could use my card. And second, I had no clue how much this catering even cost. When I asked, she shrugged and said, "Only about $500. It's not a big deal." $500 for food I didn't even order or agree to pay for. I told her no way. I wasn't paying for something she never asked permission for. And frankly, I didn't have that kind of money just lying around. She acted all shocked and hurt, saying I was being selfish and how it was her son's first birthday. As if I'm supposed to go into debt for a party I didn't even throw. We had a massive argument in front of some of her other friends, and I ended up leaving early. Later that night, she blew up my phone with texts saying I ruined her son's day, that I was being a terrible friend, and how I didn't understand how hard things are for her right now. I just couldn't believe the audacity. After everything, I blocked her. I couldn't deal with the guilt tripping, especially over something so ridiculous. Now some mutual friends have reached out, saying I was too harsh and that I should have just helped her out because she's struggling. But I feel like she crossed a line. You don't just throw someone's money into your plans without asking them, right? So am I the a-hole for blocking her? Or did I overreact? Story 7, am I the butthole for refusing to support my brother's kids after he passed away, even though I'm financially able to? I have always had a complicated relationship with my younger brother, Jake. Growing up, we were never close. Jake was the golden child in the family, and I was always expected to support him, help him out, and be there for him, even when he made terrible decisions. He was always the reckless one, dropping out of college, getting into trouble, and having kids he couldn't really afford with multiple women. 5 months ago, Jake tragically passed away in a car accident, leaving behind 3 kids with 2 different women. It was devastating for the family, but I can't say Jake's life choices didn't contribute to some of his struggles. He had no life insurance, no savings, and left his kids in pretty bad shape financially. My parents, who are both retired and living on a fixed income, asked me to step up and help support Jake's kids. I'm financially stable, well off even. I run my own business, and my wife and I don't have kids of our own, so we live pretty comfortably. My parents think it's my responsibility to take over for Jake now that he's gone. They've been pressuring me to set up college funds for his kids, help with their living expenses, and even contribute to their mother's bills, as both women are struggling to make ends meet. Here's the thing, I don't want to. It sounds harsh, but I feel like I'm being asked to pay for Jake's mistakes. I don't have a relationship with these kids, and I barely had one with Jake. I've spent my whole life cleaning up his messes, and now that he's gone, I feel like I'm finally free of that obligation. I didn't ask him to have multiple kids with no plan for their future. My wife agrees with me, and she feels like we shouldn't have to sacrifice our financial freedom because of my brother's poor decisions. But now my family is furious with me. They're calling me heartless, saying I'm abandoning my own blood, and that Jake's kids will end up in poverty without my help. Some of my friends think I'm being too cold, and should at least help a little, even if I don't go all in. I get that these kids didn't ask to be born into this situation, but I also don't think it's my responsibility to fix everything just because I'm the one with money. My wife and I worked hard to get where we are, and I feel like we shouldn't be expected to give that up for decisions we didn't make. So, am I the a-hole for refusing to financially support my late brother's kids, even though I can afford it?